the hearing of the Helsinki Commission. I thank our witnesses for being here. I particularly want to thank Senator Cantwell for allowing us to use this committee room, the Small Business Committee that I have the opportunity of serving on. This hearing is scheduled primarily because of the venue of the OSCE Parliamentary Assembly annual meeting, which will take place in Azerbaijan the end of this month. I intend to be there along with several of my colleagues in the United States Senate and in the House of Representatives. I think we'll have a pretty strong delegation that will meet in Azerbaijan to consider the important business of the Parliamentary Assembly. So in preparation for that meeting, this hearing is an opportunity for us to update the status of the relationship between the United States and Azerbaijan's fulfillment of the commitments under the OSCE. Let me also point out that yesterday I had an opportunity to meet with the Azerbaijan ambassador to the United States. I thought we had a very good meeting. He apologizes for not being here. He had meetings on the security front with representatives of the United States at the same time. So he sends his apologies. The purpose of this hearing, as advertised, is to look at the security, economic, and human rights dimension of the U.S.-Azerbaijan relations. And when we look at each of the baskets, each of the three baskets, there is a robust matters that we can discuss today. And I'm pleased that we have our panelists to do that. On the security front, clearly Azerbaijan has been helpful to the United States and our allies in regards to Afghanistan. Their troops are in Afghanistan, and the Northern Distribution Network relies very heavily on Azerbaijan. So they're an important strategic partner of the United States. They have supported our position in the United Nations, the Security Council, particularly as it relates to Ukraine and the territorial integrity of Ukraine. And for that, very much, we have a strategic partner that's important to our country. Ukraine's territorial integrity is an issue of great concern. The frozen conflict in NK is a matter that we need to focus on, and I know during our visit it will be a matter that we will be talking with the Azerbaijani officials as well as other delegations that will be in Azerbaijan. Their support on counterterrorism is an important strategic partnership with the United States, and one that we certainly want to build upon. In regards to the economic dimension, Azerbaijan is a very important country on oil and on minerals. We have cooperated with them, and they were, I point out, the first signatory to the EITI, a matter of great interest to the Helsinki Commission, a matter that we have taken strong proponents of transparency within the extractive industries. And I think one of the points that I will want to inquire about is how much they're committed to transparency within the extractive industries. In regards to the third basket, dealing with the human rights dimension, there's concern. And I mentioned that with the ambassador yesterday. Their presidential elections that took place fell short of international standards, a matter that I would like to make sure that our record is complete on. It's an authoritarian rule country that raises certain concerns on their commitments to the OSCE principles. The concern of freedom of the media, and there are several individuals who are been harassed and detained because of their desire to report what's happening in Azerbaijan that falls short of the OSCE commitments, and something that we will be mentioning by name during our visit to Azerbaijan. The right of association, political opposition, all are matters of grave concern as to whether Azerbaijan is meeting their commitments under the Helsinki principles. So we have a robust area to deal with today, and at this point let me turn to our our witnesses that we have here today, and again, thank them for being here. The first panel of witnesses, if I can get their official titles. I know I have it here someplace. I found it. Tom Melia, the Deputy Assistant Secretary, Bureau of Democracy, Human Rights, and Labor, Department of State, a member of our commission, and a frequent participant in the Helsinki Commission. It's always a pleasure to have Secretary Melia with us. And Eric Rubin, the Deputy Assistant Secretary, Bureau of Europe and Eurasia Affairs, Department of State. So we have the two experts from the administration on these issues, and we look forward to your testimony. As is the custom of our commission, your written statements will be made part of our record. You may proceed as you wish. Secretary Rubin.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, thank you for inviting us to speak with you today about our bilateral relationship with Azerbaijan. Our partnership with Azerbaijan remains a critically important aspect of our engagement in the Caucasus and the wider region. For over 20 years since Azerbaijan's independence, the United States has been working with Azerbaijan to promote a secure, prosperous, and democratic society, and in that time, we've provided approximately $1.1 billion in assistance to pursue these goals. My testimony today will focus on the core areas of our bilateral relationship. First, I will talk about our security cooperation. Second, I will look at our evolving economic relationship, including energy diversification and our efforts to promote economic reform. Finally, I will briefly examine the country's democratic development, a subject that Deputy Assistant Secretary Melia will cover in greater detail. First, Azerbaijan has been a key partner for the United States and NATO from Kabul to Kosovo. Azerbaijan currently has 94 troops serving in Afghanistan and has committed to remain in the country beyond 2014. Azerbaijan is a key node in the Northern Distribution Network and air route, sending non-lethal goods in and out of Afghanistan. As such, strengthening Caspian security, countering terrorism, stemming the proliferation of weapons of mass destruction, and enhancing maritime domain awareness continue to be top priorities for U.S. assistance to Azerbaijan. Over the past 12 years, we have provided $44.4 million in foreign military financing and $9.9 million in international military education and training and export control and border security programs that focus on military professionalization, building interoperability, and enhancing border security. And we are providing approximately $4 million in this current fiscal year. We provide security assistance to Azerbaijan while carefully ensuring it is used to comply with U.S. law. As a co-chair country of the OSCE Minsk Group, along with France and Russia, the United States is doing everything we can to facilitate a peaceful settlement to the Nagorno-Karabakh conflict. We hope the presidents of Armenia and Azerbaijan will agree to meet in the near future to continue the constructive dialogue begun at their summit last November. It is also important that both governments support Track 2 efforts to build people-to-people contacts between Azerbaijanis and Armenians. These kind of confidence-building measures can help to prepare citizens of both countries for peace. The United States enjoys growing economic cooperation with Azerbaijan, particularly in the area of energy. As Europe looks more resolutely to diversify its sources of energy away from its dependence on Russia as part of its energy security strategy, Azerbaijan is emerging as a crucial supplier for our European allies. The Baku-Tbilisi-Ceyhan oil pipeline, which began operating in June 2006, was an early success for our Southern Corridor diplomacy, and now we are focused on developing a gas link between Azerbaijan and Europe. Completing the Southern Gas Corridor will bring 10 billion cubic meters of Caspian natural gas, perhaps more, to Western Europe starting in 2019. While energy remains an important part of our bilateral economic relationship, it is not the only focus. Azerbaijan and its neighbors could become a premier trade and transportation corridor between Europe and Asia, but to do so, they must first reduce costs associated with high customs and tariffs and address delays caused by a lack of regional coordination. Time is of the essence, and the United States strongly supports reforms that will create sustainable sources of non-oil revenue in Azerbaijan and new opportunities for U.S. exports and investment, including in areas like aviation, communications technology, and heavy equipment. The United States also supports Azerbaijan's accession into the WTO and the rules-based system in which its members participate. In this context, it is important to note the role that corruption plays in the entire OSCE space, including Azerbaijan. Working with the government of Azerbaijan and local partners, we are committed to enhancing efforts to address this problem. Finally, our strongest relationships throughout the world are with democracies that respect the full range of human rights of their citizens. We have concerns about the environment for democratic development and the protection of human rights in Azerbaijan, which have been deteriorating. My colleague Tamilia will touch on that in more detail in a moment. Going forward, our relationship will continue to be based on all of these core areas: security cooperation, economic and energy cooperation, and democratic development. Our mission remains to address each of these areas with equal rigor and resolve in advancing our national interest. And we are committed to working with Congress in a bipartisan manner in our efforts to realize each of these goals and the full potential of the U.S.-Azerbaijani relationship. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Secretary Milia.
Mr. Chairman, thank you for inviting me to speak today about democracy and human rights dimension of our bilateral relationship with Azerbaijan. I greatly appreciate the dedication you have demonstrated over the years to the OSCE, and especially to the enduring principles enshrined in the Helsinki Final Act and the body of commitments that comprise the OSCE's human dimension. I would start with reference to a key tenet of the OSCE canon as set forth in the 1991 Moscow document and reaffirmed most recently in the 2010 Astana Summit Declaration, in which all of the OSCE participating states agreed, and I'm quoting now, categorically and irrevocably, that the commitments undertaken in the field of the human dimension of the OSCE are matters of direct and legitimate concern to all participating states and do not belong exclusively to the internal affairs of the state concerned. This concept linking respect for human rights within states to prosperity and lasting security among states is reflected in our multilateral and bilateral interactions with all OSCE participating states, including with Azerbaijan. In Azerbaijan, this constitutes one of three equally important core goals about which Deputy Assistant Secretary Rubin has just spoken. And U.S. officials regularly meet with a variety of Azerbaijanis, ranging from senior government officials to civil society activists and opposition political party representatives. While serving as Deputy Assistant Secretary, I have visited Azerbaijan 3 times, holding valuable meetings with leading government officials, including President Aliyev, as well as with opposition leaders, civil society, and journalists. And I've been joined on these missions by senior colleagues from the Department of State's Europe and Eurasia Bureau, from USAID, and the Department of Justice. And I would like to visit Azerbaijan again soon to continue these conversations with people inside and outside of government. The United States also provides material assistance to support Azerbaijan's democratic development. The largest part of this assistance is provided by our colleagues at USAID, and we in the State Department work very closely with them, as we also collaborate with the legal experts provided by the Department of Justice. And this interagency collaboration works well. 5 years ago, at the outset of this administration, it was already difficult for advocates of democratic reform, and especially opposition political parties, to participate in the political life of the country. But it was still possible for NGOs and independent activists to operate. Sadly, the environment has worsened significantly since then, beginning with the 2009 incarceration of young democracy activists Yamin Mili and Adnan Hajizadze. The suppression of peaceful dissent increased in 2011 with the arrests of young Azerbaijani activists who sought to organize peaceful pro-democracy rallies in Baku. Azerbaijan's parliament later passed legislation significantly increasing fines on participants and organizers of unauthorized protests in November of 2012, which resulted in the detention of numerous peaceful activists for baseless administrative violations. Since early 2013, the space for peaceful dissent has narrowed more dramatically, and the exercise of fundamental freedoms has become still more tenuous. A number of leading peaceful democracy advocates, civil society activists, and journalists have been incarcerated, including the chairman of the reform-oriented Real movement, Ilgar Mammadov, the journalist and Musavat Party deputy chairman, Tofik Yagublu, members of democratic youth movements, the blogger Abdul Abilov, religious scholar and activist Talela Girzadeh, Kural editor Avaz Zenali, and the chairman of the local election monitoring partner of the National Democratic Institute, Anar Mamadli, chairman of the Election Monitoring and Democracy Studies Center, which had provided a critical report on the presidential elections to which you referred, Mr. Chairman. 2 rounds of legislative amendments since March of 2013 have further restricted NGO funding and activity. Officials have pressured Azerbaijani and international NGOs, including some of the U.S. government's closest partners there. Such actions add up to an increasingly hostile operating environment for civil society, especially for those activists and groups advocating respect for human rights, fundamental freedoms, and government accountability, thereby depriving citizens the open channels through which they can legitimately voice their concerns. Pressure on independent defense lawyers, moreover, has resulted in a decreasing number of lawyers ready to defend individuals in politically sensitive cases. Restrictions on the ability of Azerbaijani activists to travel outside the country are also a problem. For example, since 2006, the government has prevented the foreign travel of opposition Popular Front Party chairman Ali Karimli by refusing to renew his passport. One of Azerbaijan's leading human rights defenders, Ms. Leyla Yunus, was unable to attend an OSCE discussion taking place today in Bern, Switzerland, on the important role of human rights defenders because Azerbaijan's authorities confiscated her passport. This confiscation occurred in the context of the April 19 arrest of well-known journalist Rauf Merkadirov, the subsequent questioning of Leyla Yunus and her husband about Merkadirov, and their poor treatment by police in custody. All three have been strong proponents of people-to-people diplomacy of the kind Secretary Rubin referred to, which helps build ties between Azerbaijanis and Armenians and is crucial to the eventual peaceful resolution of the Nagorno-Karabakh conflict. These are not the kind of actions the United States or the broader international community wants to see from a partner, an OSCE participating state, and currently the chair of the Committee of Ministers of the Council of Europe. We recognize that Azerbaijan lives in a very difficult neighborhood. The United States strongly supports Azerbaijan's long-term stability, security, and prosperity. The best way to guarantee such a future, we believe, is to advance democratic processes and institutions to buttress respect for the rule of law and fundamental freedoms. Doing so will foster long-term internal stability, create the most inviting environment for economic investment and growth, and make Azerbaijan the very best it can be by giving every citizen the freedom and space to achieve his or her potential. We consider this to be in the short-term and long-term interests of the Azerbaijani people and the government. And as President Obama explained in his May 28 speech at West Point, America's support for democracy and human rights goes beyond idealism. It is a matter of national security. Democracies are our best friends and are far less likely to go to war. And yet, he noted, in capitals around the globe, including, unfortunately, some of America's partners, there has been a crackdown on civil society. The United States believes that Azerbaijan will have greater stability and prosperity and will more quickly achieve its potential by allowing for a more open society. We will continue to urge Azerbaijan to live up to its OSCE and other international human rights commitments. As President Obama indicated in his recent message marking Azerbaijan's National Day, and to return to where I began, we encourage Azerbaijan to reclaim the leadership role on human rights and fundamental freedoms its people and government demonstrated 96 years ago. Thank you again, Mr. Chairman, for this opportunity to discuss democracy and human rights in Azerbaijan.
Well, thank you both for your testimony. Let me start with what is on, I think, the minds of people in Azerbaijan more than anything else, and that is the concern about territorial integrity. With Russia's actions in Georgia and now Russia's actions in Ukraine, that is clearly the most talked about issues in that region of the world. Russia is very active in Azerbaijan in regards to being physically present. They have had many of their leaders in Azerbaijan talking to the officials of Azerbaijan. Can you just update us as to how you see the events in Ukraine impacting on Azerbaijan's foreign policy and concerns about Russia's actions?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This has been a subject of very intensive discussion and dialogue with the government of Azerbaijan, as it has been with every country in the region, because the principle that we're defending in defense of Ukraine's territorial integrity and sovereignty applies to all the countries of the region, and indeed to every country that's a member of the United Nations and the Organization for the Security and Cooperation in Europe. With Azerbaijan, as Deputy Assistant Secretary Amelia said, I think exactly right, Azerbaijan lives in a very dangerous neighborhood. It's got Russia to the north, it's got Iran to the south. These are very real concerns, and we are committed to working with the government of Azerbaijan to help them strengthen their ability to defend their territory, defend their sovereignty and territorial integrity, and to be sure that it's not just words, but actually the ability to be truly an independent country. This is the subject, as I mentioned, of ongoing dialogue. It's something that we've been very, very clear in supporting when we speak to the leadership in Baku, Our ambassador, Dick Morningstar, has been following up ever since the crisis started in Ukraine, and it's something we expect to be working very closely with the government in Baku to support them publicly and privately.
I would just point out that OSCE is in a particularly strong position here, since both Russia, Ukraine, Azerbaijan, Armenia, all are full members of the OSCE. It has had some success within Ukraine on its mission on providing at least objective eyes of what's happening in the eastern part of Ukraine. Do you see the OSCE mechanism working towards trying to provide some confidence in that region on some semblance of territorial integrity?
Mr. Chairman, I think OSCE has a very strong track record in this region and, as a matter of fact, has played the central role in the peace process between Azerbaijan and Armenia since the conflict began more than 20 years ago. And to this day, OSCE is the premier international organization on the ground in Azerbaijan and Armenia through the Minsk Group, through the mission on the ground that monitors the situation along the line of contact, through the mission that helps promote efforts to broaden dialogue. So I think OSCE is already, in many ways, in the lead, but then going beyond that, dealing with the situation that we have post the crisis in Ukraine, I think, yes, there is a real possibility for the organization to play a greater role.
Well, the Nagorno-Karabakh conflict is one of the longest frozen conflicts in Europe. The United States is part of the Minsk Group. The Madrid proposal is now many years old. It still looks like the principal framework to try to make progress in regards to the conflict. What is the current status? Is there any breakthrough likely to occur that could move this conflict to a resolution?
As one of the three co-chairs of the Minsk Group, we've been working very closely with Russia and France to try to come up with ideas to try to move this forward this year. We would, I think, be very reluctant to predict breakthroughs, but I think progress is very possible. The three co-chairs have worked hard to come up with an approach that both countries can accept for a series of meetings, including a summit meeting of the two presidents. We've been, I think, very strong in supporting the Minsk Group through appointing a senior American diplomat and experienced negotiator, Ambassador Jim Warlick, to work this issue full-time, which he's been doing since last year. Cooperation with the other two co-chair countries, France and Russia, is very good, and I think all three countries, together with the larger OSCE community, are determined to try to make possible some opportunities this year. One of the things we have done is spoken through the three co-chairs about the vision of a settlement. It is the vision that has been reflected in past rounds, including in Madrid, and the goal is to try to get both countries together with the co-chairs to agree on a path forward. The goal now is to see if we can get a meeting of the two leaders scheduled in coming months, and we're hopeful and optimistic that that will happen, and we believe that both leaders do want to see progress. We think it's important to support them in that, but also to push. As you said, Mr. Chairman, it's been more than 2 decades. This is a real conflict. It is a live conflict. People die every year. It's literally a shooting war, thankfully, usually on a small scale, but nonetheless unacceptable in the 21st century to have this going on. And getting this settled in the interest of all the people involved in both countries, both populations, is a very, very high priority for us.
Is the Madrid proposal still very much the framework that we believe is the appropriate framework to make progress, or is there expectations that there will be a new proposal or modifications of that proposal that will move forward?
Mr. Chairman, the three co-chairs laid out a vision for moving forward this year that drew very heavily on the principles reflected in Madrid and indeed on every iteration of this process, because the basic concept is pretty much the same and has been since the negotiation began. But literally using the Madrid proposal, I think, is not going to happen because neither country wants to use Madrid alone. But I think anything that they come up with, and this was reflected in the statement by the co-chairs, will look a lot like Madrid, because there is no other real approach to solving this other than based on the principles of OSCE and the United Nations Charter, and that is what Madrid was, and that is what the current approach is.
Well, I've been active in the OSCE for many years, and this has been on our agenda every year. It's very frustrating, and I know it's not easy, but it seems to me that it's within the leadership of the United States and Russia and France, as the co-chairs of the Minsk Group, to make this a more urgent priority, particularly with the anxiety that currently exists in Europe. It seems to me that a breakthrough in regards to this conflict would have a major positive impact on confidence and stability in that region. So I would urge you to make that a very high priority to try to make progress. Let me turn to your comments in regards to the economy and the obvious that so much of their economy is based upon based upon oil and gas. And I agree with you that it's in our interest to see whether they can't diversify their economy. And I'm going to get to that in one moment, their accession into the WTO. But in regards to the energy sector, we've seen the vulnerability of Ukraine to Russia, and having a supply of alternative energy in Europe is very much in the U.S. interest, very much, I think, in the regional interest. So the pipeline is one of great interest. I mentioned originally that Azerbaijan was the first country to embrace the EITI. That doesn't mean they're complying with it. Can you just bring us, this Commission, up to date as to what is the current status of their energy commitments to transparency? I will get to corruption in one moment, but do we have hope that they are following the best practices of the EITI in regards to their arrangements with the mineral extractive industry companies, so that the people of Azerbaijan have a hope of knowing whether those resources are going to the advancement of their country?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is a subject of very active discussion, not just between the United States and Azerbaijan, but as you mentioned, as part of the WTO accession process with their other partners. Azerbaijan has been the critical country, I would say, in advancing energy diversification for Europe. And it's not just a question of the past projects such as BTC, but the very real project now to bring the Shah Deniz 2 resources to Europe through the Trans-Anatolian and Trans-Adriatic pipelines, which the United States strongly supports. So this is about big, important projects, and we strongly agree with you that it's very important that there be transparency. Our ambassador in Baku, Dick Morningstar, is, I think, more familiar with these issues than anyone else, having worked BTC personally and having been involved in every stage of this since the 1990s. This is part of his regular dialogue. This will be part of our dialogue with Azerbaijan when we have our regular economic talks with Azerbaijan. We believe the Azerbaijani government is serious about the commitments it's making as part of the WTO accession process and the commitments it's made to the partners in the international energy projects, and we will continue focusing on this in our dialogue with them.
Thank you. Secretary Amelia, since you are a member of the Commission, we try to be a little bit easier to you in questioning, but let me just make an observation and ask you in regards to the corruption and human rights issues in Azerbaijan. You correctly identified our strong interest in stability of partners, and to have a stable partner, that country needs to have a commitment towards economic opportunity for all of its citizens, sharing the wealth of the country, and adhering to international norms on human rights. Not our norms, but international norms on human rights. No country is perfect, and this Commission has been critical of all countries, including our own, in regards to meeting the Helsinki commitments. I was recently in Ukraine, and my observations there was that the protesters were more concerned about a government that was honest than it was about trying to pick sides on loyalty. They wanted an independent Ukraine where the resources of their country went to the benefit of their people, free from corruption. In Vietnam, it was very clear in all of our discussions that Vietnam has a serious problem of corruption, and they need to deal with it. We now have an opportunity in the TPP to have reasons for progress to be made in Vietnam on good governance. In Singapore, on the Shangri-La Security Conference, we brought up frequently the good governance issues as it relates to security in that region. So my question to you is, as we look at Azerbaijan's membership in the WTO, what specific reforms should be the highest priority? What efforts can we reasonably expect to deal with corruption or to deal with the freedom of the media, or as you point out, the freedom to travel, which is a basic commitment within the Helsinki Accords? In Vietnam, we have a checklist, literally a checklist of progress that we believe is reasonable to be made, and we've gone over that with the Vietnamese government officials, and we had a very, very, I think, positive exchange when they were here on the human rights basket with their delegation and my visit to Vietnam. What expectations do you believe are reasonable for us to anticipate in Azerbaijan?
Well, Mr. Chairman, you've very eloquently described a major challenge that we have in many parts of the world in trying to deal with partner governments to bring them into the modern economy in a way that enables the prosperity to be shared more widely in each of these countries. You're exactly right in describing the situation in Ukraine as one that was animated by this very question of lack of transparency and accountability by authoritarian governments that don't feel like they have to tell their people what they do with their money. That is the heart of the issue, and I don't know that there's a single magic silver bullet that can solve these problems. It's part of the tapestry of democratic governance and respect for rights that we're working to try to help Azerbaijanis achieve. We know that, like many other countries, there's anti-corruption legislation in place in Azerbaijan. There's a national action plan. There's all kinds of formalities. And there have been some small steps taken at the local level in some places, particularly around Baku, to eliminate petty corruption, a kind of small bore, fee-for-service kind of corruption that police and local administration officials. They've set up these Asan centers, which is the Azerbaijani word for easy. It's like the easy button place where you go to get all your licenses and permits and so on. And those seem to be having some positive impact in their realm of where the ordinary public engages with local administration. But the larger question about where the massive resources go and where the endemic corruption at a macro level, that requires a country in which journalists are allowed to report on what their government does, where a parliament reflecting the diversity of opinion in the country can have open and public hearings about exactly these kinds of issues, where NGOs can be watchdogs and publish reports without fear of retribution. Those are all the things that Azerbaijan needs and could benefit from. They could be a more stable, a country where prosperity is more widely shared if they were respecting the rights of people to ask questions and research and talk about these issues. So there's a whole welter of fundamental freedoms that are constrained in Azerbaijan right now, as we've just gone through. And the people who are trying to bring these issues to public discussion end up unjustly imprisoned for their work. So there's the fundamental freedoms do hobble a country. Lack of respect for fundamental freedoms is a major impediment to any country trying to do the responsible thing in terms of fighting corruption and establishing a responsible government.
Before we leave at the end of this month, we will review with you some of the specifics, particularly individuals who have been harassed and imprisoned, because we do believe putting a face on the issue is one of the best ways you can get the attention necessary to make the fundamental changes. Yes, we want to see these individuals released or not harassed, but we also want to see fundamental changes, not just in their laws, but the way their laws are enforced. So it's not as simple as just the constitutional provisions or legal changes, because there are many countries that are very oppressive that have laws that would seem to provide basic rights to their citizens, but the way that they're enforced deny them the opportunity to enjoy universal basic rights. So we will be looking to Azerbaijan to make these changes, not because it's we're asking them to. It's their commitments under OSCE, and it's their commitment to their own people that we think will allow the country to become a more prosperous, a more stable ally in that region for peace. So we'll continue to work with you to develop that type of list. One additional question before I turn it over to Senator Wicker, and that is that Azerbaijan has a very constructive relationship with Israel, of course, our close ally in that region. Can you just bring us up to date as to how that relationship has played out in regards to regional stability?
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think the Azerbaijani-Israeli relationship is a model. It is definitely a source of not just security and economic benefit to both countries, but also a source of stability in the region. Azerbaijan has been very supportive, not just bilaterally and privately, but also publicly, of Israel's security, of the need for a peace process that will succeed in the Middle East in bringing a just and lasting settlement and also security to all the countries, including Israel. We see this as something that's very positive. Also, that relationship has been very important in terms of counterterrorism cooperation, which is something that we value greatly and see as a benefit to us and the entire international community, as well as to Azerbaijan and Israel themselves.
Senator Wicker has led an OSCE delegation, the Helsinki delegation to Baku, so he's our expert on Azerbaijan, and he will be joining us in our visit later this month. Senator Wicker.
Well, thank you, and thank you, Senator Cardin, for your leadership in this issue, for your leadership in OSCE. When we go to these meetings, the leadership around Europe knows they can look to Ben Cardin for a great degree of knowledge and understanding and wisdom about these issues. For a country the geographic size of Maine and a relatively small population, I think we rightly give a lot of attention to Azerbaijan because of the importance, not only locally there, but in the region and what it says about the rest of that area. The administration has sent one of our best people there in Ambassador Morningstar for a location so small. I think the administration recognizes the strategic importance of having a Dick Morningstar there. And we greatly benefited as a delegation last year. I guess it was 4th of July when our delegation was there. How important is it, do you think, gentlemen, that OSCE is the locale of this summer's Parliamentary Assembly, and that the eyes of Europe, not only the United States and the international press, but the entire European community will be on this little location that just had the presidential election, where we had OSCE observers, and that's so strategically located. Is there any particular benefit or significance to the fact that we're having the PA meeting there in late June?
Senator, thank you, and thank you for your commitment to this relationship and for your travel there last year. I absolutely would agree that Azerbaijan is significantly more important than its size would otherwise suggest for many reasons. Location is one of them. Commitment to supporting the international community in places like Afghanistan is another. Energy diversification is a third. So it's absolutely true that supporting Azerbaijan's independence, territorial integrity should be a high priority, is a high priority for us. As you mentioned, the President's choice of Dick Morningstar, former ambassador to the European Union, as ambassador to Azerbaijan, testified to that importance.
It's a statement.
It's a statement, and it was meant as a statement, a very positive statement. So I think in that regard, it's absolutely true. We think it's very positive that the Parliamentary Assembly will be going to Baku. It's an opportunity for dialogue and familiarization in both directions with ideas, concerns, and I think it should be a very good dialogue. I think members of the PA will see a lot of progress in Azerbaijan. Those who have not been there in a long time but are coming back will certainly see that evident progress. There are obviously other issues, such as the ones that Deputy Assistant Secretary Melia has suggested, that are also important to have as part of that discussion. So we hope it's a very broad discussion, and we think the spotlight on Azerbaijan and its importance is justified and valuable.
These are important opportunities to demonstrate not only a partnership with government officials and parliamentary counterparts, but we're hoping that you would also have time to meet with some of the people we've talked about who have sought to be responsible watchdogs and advocates for reform, anti-corruption, for fair elections, et cetera, and who find themselves harassed often by the government and by various levels of government. So we hope that you and other colleagues from other legislatures will use the opportunity to demonstrate a broad interest in Azerbaijan as a society and the various aspects of its society, and make a point of meeting with a number of people beyond official corridors.
I think it's important for us to hear all different points of view. Mr. Rubin, you mentioned Afghanistan, and our hat is off to the Azerbaijanis for their great help with our effort in Afghanistan. Is that not correct?
Senator, absolutely. I think the role that Azerbaijan has played throughout the NATO, ISAF, and U.S. bilateral engagement in Afghanistan has been very important, deeply appreciated, and not just the role in facilitating the northern distribution network and transit to and from Afghanistan, but also Azerbaijan's readiness to put boots on the ground and to stay there as they still are currently under Turkish command in ISAF is very, very important. Our discussions with Azerbaijan about the security of the region are quite broad and quite important. Azerbaijan's location, as I mentioned earlier, is central not just in the strategic sense but also economically in terms of trade and transit in the future. We hope global trade through that region. So very much so, and we do very much appreciate the role that Azerbaijan has played in the effort in Afghanistan.
So when we talk about the location, I suppose this might have been mentioned during your testimony or during Senator Cardin's questioning, but they're so very, very close to Iran and so very, very close to Russia. And yet, in spite of that, they've chosen to seek the friendship of the United States, and I think that speaks volumes, does it not?
Senator, I would absolutely agree, and I think the one thing that's been clear since Azerbaijan's independence is the determination of not just its leadership and the various governments over the years, but also of Azerbaijanis as a whole to defend their independence. It was hard won. It was defeated after the first attempt almost a century ago, and I think that's something that unites all Azerbaijanis. It's something that we strongly support. Obviously, Azerbaijan needs to have a good relationship with Russia and Iran. It's its two big neighbors. They have to balance that. We recognize that. But the commitment to the relationship with us, with NATO, in the Eastern Partnership with the European Union is obviously something they've chosen and is very important.
I think it's a profound statement on the part of the leadership of that country as to how they view the United States as a friend in a neighborhood where there are very powerful forces to the north and south. And yes, you're correct, Mr. Rubin. They need to be friendly with their neighbors and have good relations. This hearing, Mr. Chairman, has a broad scope: security, economic, and human rights. It touches on almost everything. There is a Eurasian Economic Union now consisting of Russia, Belarus, and Kazakhstan. Armenia is about to join that. Isn't that right, Mr. Rubin? Now, what effect is that going to have on our friends in Azerbaijan?
Well, Senator, Azerbaijan has chosen to pursue its own policy on economic ties with its neighbors, and we think that's the most important aspect of this broader question. It's the point that we've been emphasizing in
That it's their decision?
that it's their decision, as it is Ukraine and Moldova and Georgia's decision to proceed with association with the European Union. We said in regard to Kazakhstan and Armenia that their choice to join the Eurasian Economic Union is also their choice, as long as it's freely made and not under coercion. Azerbaijan has said that they want good ties with all the blocs and countries, but don't intend to pursue direct association with either. They are pursuing WTO membership. They're pursuing expanding trade through those means, and we think that should be their choice, as it is for every country.
Ben, did you get into the election observers? Well, let me ask you this. Mr. Chairman, I believe we had OSCE election observers there last year. Well, was this Parliamentary Assembly and the ODIHR? Okay, so actually two entities within OSCE sent election observers. Mr. Melia, would you comment as to how beneficial that was, how effective they were, how much access they had, and how much information the OSCE and Helsinki community got as a result of these two organizations going in and helping with observation?
Well, we were reminded just a couple of weeks ago in Ukraine how important and valuable it is to have eyes on the ground and in large numbers, as the OSCE, ODIHR, and Parliamentary Assembly typically do. Having people from across Europe, East and West, to be on the ground in Ukraine was very important for all of us to know what was happening, to be able to make a sound judgment about that process, and to be able to validate the expressed will of the Ukrainian people. Similarly, in Azerbaijan last year, there were multiple delegations, international, including the OSCE delegations, and local networks of observers. The EMDS is the Azerbaijani group that's been trained over these 2 decades by international professionals from the National Democratic Institute and others. And they also provided eyes on the ground and dovetailed with what the OSCE teams were doing. And in this case, the reports were much less favorable than they were in Ukraine last month. And there were shortcomings in the election process last year that ODIHR, in its very dry and lawyerly kind of way, pointed out. That's a basis for reform efforts going forward to improve the administration of elections and more importantly, perhaps the political environment surrounding the elections, so that there's more chance for freedom of expression and mobilizing different political views. So the OSCE statements on the presidential election last year were critical, and they were echoed by our own statement at the time, which was also pointing out that we wished it had been a better process. And we do that our purpose in doing that is not just to point fingers, but it's to lay a basis for future reform efforts to improve the quality of the process. So the role of OSCE observers has been very valuable in that. We hope it will continue. And we also hope that domestic citizens of Azerbaijan will continue to be able to monitor their own government's process and performance as well. Unfortunately, since that election, the EMDS network has had a number of allegations raised about its tax management, tax payments, its financial management, the international grants that support them, and the leader of that organization has been prosecuted. And so, basically for issuing a critical report. It goes back to the point raised by Senator Cardin a few moments ago about corruption. You can't deal with problems in governance unless you can talk about them. And right now, people are getting punished for raising questions and trying to talk about how to improve their society. So that's going to be a constraint on the improvement of the political process in Azerbaijan.
In the view of the department, did the election reflect the judgment of the electorate as a whole in Azerbaijan?
I think, given the nature of the political environment in Azerbaijan, the fact that one of the leading opposition politicians who wanted to be in that election as a presidential candidate was instead in jail throughout last year and is still in jail today, Given that the leader of one of the main opposition parties cannot travel because the government won't give him a passport, I mean, these are the kinds of things that add up to, an environment where it's hard to tell what the people's choices are. People don't have a chance to cast a ballot, in the way that we would hope they could. So that's why our statement said that the process fell short of our expectations and hopes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Let me just observe, I was in Kyiv for the Ukrainian elections, and just to let Senator Wicker know, I was with Senator Portman a little before the time that one of the precincts was scheduled to open, and we saw a long line of people anxious to cast their votes. We saw a little bit of chaos as they were trying to open up the precinct as early as they possibly could. And quite frankly, it reminded me of my home precinct in Baltimore at the same time. So it was, I think, very educational for me to observe an election in Europe. And it was very clear that except in eastern Ukraine, where there was violence preventing people from voting, the elections met international standards, and that was the conclusion by the observers, that it did meet the international standards for a free and fair election. And the will of the people was clearly shown, with Mr. Poroshenko receiving an overwhelming majority. In Azerbaijan, the vote was overwhelming, and popular sentiment, I think, would probably reflect that. But because of reasons we've already stated, the opposition not having adequate opportunity to present their case, not having the freedom of the media, and the integrity of the election process itself, that is, ensuring that the votes that were cast were actually counted appropriately, which there was not that type of integrity in the system there, led to the conclusion that it was not a free and fair election under international standards. So that's an area where Azerbaijan needs to improve. It may not have changed the outcome of the election, but it can't get the stamp of international recognition that the OSCE monitors are there to provide. So for all those reasons, we were unable to certify the election. We're joined now by my co-chair, Congressman Smith. Let him catch his breath if you like. Thank you. And he will lead our delegation in Baku. We alternate between the House and Senate on the annual head of our delegation, so Congressman Smith will lead the delegation, and has traveled extensively throughout all that region. So we really do plan to be a very active participant. I made the observation in the beginning of this hearing that this country is very important to U.S. interests. We have a lot of strategic partnership issues in security and energy and fighting extremists. And it's for that reasons that we pay particular attention. But other countries are also paying attention. Senator Wicker mentioned the fact that Azerbaijan borders Russia. What we want is an independent Azerbaijan. We want a country that will exercise what's right for its own people, but we want a country that's stable, that respects human rights, that has economic opportunities for all of its citizens, as well as a strategic partner on national security issues with the United States. With that, let me recognize and turn it over to Chairman Smith.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman and Ranking Member Wicker. And I want to welcome our very distinguished panelists and thank them for their service to our country and for raising these extraordinarily important issues, particularly as it relates to human rights. It will be, I think, really important that we head back to Baku. Senator Wicker led us there last year for some very important meetings with high-level officials. And at the time, we did raise the human rights issues very robustly. And I know we'll be back there doing it again within the parameters of the Parliamentary Assembly, but also with some bilaterals that I know that we will engage in. I do have a full statement, Mr. Chairman, that I'd like to make a part of the record. But again, I just want to thank you for calling this very timely hearing so that we're further empowered, informed, so that we understand, from the department especially, what your insights and recommendations will be. And this, I think, will be a good trip, and I thank you, Mr. Chairman, for convening this hearing.
Great. We're going to turn to the second panel. Then. Okay, if you have. Let me thank both of our witnesses for their testimony, and we look forward to working with you as we travel to Azerbaijan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you.
Let me turn to the second panel. Mariam Laskoy, who is the Director for Russia and Eurasia, the National Endowment for Democracy, and Brenda Shaver, the Visiting Researcher, Center for Eurasia, Russia, and East European Studies, Georgetown University. It's a pleasure to have both of you with us today. You've been, I know, a valuable resource to our Commission, and we appreciate that. As I explained in the introductory remarks, this hearing is for preparation for our visit to Azerbaijan and the attendance of our delegation at the OSCE Parliamentary Assembly later this month. With that, we'll start with Ms. Lanskoy.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, I'm grateful to the Helsinki Commission for holding this hearing and for giving me an opportunity to speak. The National Endowment for Democracy is a private, non-profit foundation dedicated to the growth of democratic institutions around the world. NED has been working in Azerbaijan for many years and maintains a large portfolio in Azerbaijan. Over the last 10 years, freedom in Azerbaijan has declined gradually. But over the last year, there has been an unprecedented crackdown. Through membership in the Council of Europe and the OSCE, Azerbaijan has committed itself to the protection of human rights. Unfortunately, Azerbaijan obtains the prestige associated with these organizations without fulfilling their basic conditions. Azerbaijan is the chairman of the Committee of Ministers of the Council of Europe, a body charged with ensuring compliance with the judgments of the European Court of Human Rights. However, Azerbaijan itself has not complied with numerous decisions of the European Court. And though Azerbaijan violates OSCE norms of human rights, it is about to host the Parliamentary Assembly. Recent events in Ukraine have complex implications for Azerbaijan. The protests that toppled the corrupt government there rattled nerves in Baku. But numerous prior revolutions in the region have had little effect on Azerbaijan. More significant for Baku is the annexation of Crimea, because that means that Russia is an arbiter of borders on the territory in the former Soviet Union and can decide these questions unilaterally. The crisis in Ukraine highlights the need to diversify energy sources, and this creates opportunities for Baku to seek out partners and extend its influence. While at home, it is taking advantage of the crisis to silence critics of the government. The number of political prisoners continues to grow. Amnesty International has recognized 19 prisoners of conscience. The U.S. Commission for International Religious Freedom, in its annual report, which was just released, provides a list of 51 religious prisoners in Azerbaijan. Human Rights Watch has published a comprehensive report that contains cases against activists, human rights defenders, and journalists. I want to touch on a couple of these cases. Two prominent opposition figures, Tofik Yakublu and Ilgar Mammadov, were sentenced to 5 and 7 years. In its ruling on this case, the European Court found that Azerbaijan is in violation of several articles of the Convention, including Article 18, and it has awarded damages to Ilgar Mammadov. The European Court found that the actual purpose was to silence or punish the applicant for criticizing the government. The Committee of Ministers of the Council of Europe, which Azerbaijan now chairs, is supposed to oversee the implementation of a court's decisions. Human Rights Watch has profiled the use of narcotics charges against youth activists who apparently had drugs planted on them by police. Youth activists criticized the government on social media. They were arrested for narcotics charges, they were questioned about their politics, and they received long jail sentences. And Human Rights Watch has several cases of this happening. Finally, I want to draw your attention to the case of Leyla Yunus, who's the director of the Institute of Peace and Democracy. She's worked on human rights for 20 years, many types of issues, including compiling lists of political prisoners. The government has retaliated against her in the past, most clearly in 2011 when her office was demolished. She was questioned in connection with a case against Rauf Mirkadirov, who's an Azeri journalist who is now being held for participating in Track 2 meetings with Armenians. During the questioning over a month ago, Leyla and her husband Arif had their passports taken away, but no charges have been filed. Their passports should be returned and they should be permitted to travel. Pressure against NGOs is continuing to mount. New amendments to the NGO law made it illegal for unregistered groups to receive grants or donations. Penalties for NGOs that don't register a grant were expanded. Onerous reporting requirements have been extended to international organizations. Grantees report months of efforts to register grants and withdraw funds from banks. So you can have a registered organization, a registered grant, and it's a big struggle to register, and then still not be able to access your funds from a bank account. And this seems to so far be inconclusive. There's different scenarios unfolding there. There's considerable apprehension that the new regulations will be selectively enforced against organizations that are critical of the government. Even prior to these amendments, Azerbaijan was violating freedom of association by over-regulating NGOs. The Venice Commission found that the process of registering NGOs in Azerbaijan was too cumbersome, lengthy, and unpredictable. In 5 separate decisions, the European Court has found that Azerbaijan violates freedom of association by denying registration to NGOs. Baku should be bringing its NGO legislation in compliance with the European Court and with the Venice Commission opinions, rather than imposing even more burdens on NGOs. The case of the Election Monitoring and Democracy Studies Center illustrates why these laws are used to silence critics in the government. EMDS is a vote monitoring organization, has made numerous attempts to register and has repeatedly been denied. EMDS entered into a contract with a registered organization to carry out its activities. This arrangement became grounds to sentence Anar Mamedli to 5.5 years and Bashir Suleimani to 3.5 years. In closing, I'm grateful to the Helsinki Commission for convening this hearing. I hope that the Commission will remain engaged by calling on the government of Azerbaijan to release political prisoners and repeal new regulations against NGOs. Further, I would urge that the Parliamentary Assembly, which will convene in Baku, for it to include voices from Azeri civil society. I would also urge members of Congress who travel to Azerbaijan to visit political prisoners in prison and meet with their families. Mr. Chairman, Azerbaijan has a long-standing democratic tradition. In 1918, it became the first democracy in the Muslim world. Civil society of Azerbaijan works to fulfill that legacy and remind the government of its OSCE commitments. These brave and talented people should be permitted to do their important work without harassment and intimidation. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony. Ms. Shaver?
As a teenager growing up in the San Francisco Bay Area, on the wall next to my bed, instead of posters of rock stars or Hollywood actors, I had a picture of the Helsinki Declaration Final Act. My mom's listening to this, she can probably confirm it. These principles inspired most of the activism of my youth, and even as a high school student at Burlingame High School, a district represented by Congressman Tom Lantos, I went to the Soviet Union, visited Soviet refuseniks, visited other non-Jewish human rights activists in the USSR, and my voice is shaking because I'm honored and moved to testify at the Senate Commission for the Security and Cooperation in Europe, because these principles have been so much a part of my youth and my own activism. As part of that visit in 1982, I actually visited Soviet Azerbaijan and started my interest in the South Caucasus. Azerbaijan is a Shiite Muslim majority country with a strong Western orientation and a desire, as was pointed out by the earlier testimonies, for a strong alliance with the United States. Azerbaijan is not only a place where there's freedom of religion, but freedom from religion, something that's too often absent in the world. Secular people have the right to live free of religious coercion, and government protects the right of people, again, to freedom from religion as well. Azerbaijan is a land where Jews have never experienced anti-Semitism. They don't talk about feeling welcomed in Azerbaijan because they feel part of Azerbaijan, and no Azerbaijanis would consider them guests in any sense in Azerbaijan. Women were granted the right to vote in Azerbaijan 2 years before suffrage was granted in the United States and decades before many states in Europe. Azerbaijan is important, as mentioned here, to the U.S. in a wider number of issues, including its policy towards Russia, relations with Iran, nuclear non-proliferation, Middle Eastern regional security, and European energy security. Its location as the only state in between the Arctic Ocean and the Persian Gulf, except between Russia and Iran and Azerbaijan, only 3 states on that lateral. Its location is both a blessing, that's why we're here today, we're discussing this country, but also a curse. Because if you sit in between Russia and Iran, your stability, your independence is quite constrained. This almost treacherous balancing act that the regime finds itself in Azerbaijan between balancing strong orientation towards the United States, integration in Euro-Atlantic structures, but also peaceful relationships with Russia and Iran is extremely challenging because not only does it have this foreign policy aspect, but also domestic policy and military conflicts are intertwined. Russia and Iran use military conflict, use taking of territory, use even the domestic political arena in order to promote their views. Maybe if we held this hearing before the invasion of Crimea, it would be maybe difficult to make the case. I think now today it's apparent to all how Russia operates in its close environment. Russia has used military force to promote its goals in Ukraine and Georgia, neighboring countries. It uses the electoral process and civil society organizations. Russian citizens have ran in elections in Azerbaijan, Georgia, and Latvia. I mean, could you imagine a parallel in another country where foreign citizens run to the leaderships of different countries to try to get its way? And it's promoted separatists in a number of neighboring countries also to promote its interests: Moldova, Ukraine, Georgia, and Azerbaijan. The U.S. and even the OSCE Minsk Group has taken a number of steps to try to promote resolution of these same ethnic conflicts that afflict the region. Unfortunately, lack of recognition of the role that Russia plays in these conflicts really hurts and hinders the work of the OSCE Minsk Group and of the United States. For 2 decades, the U.S. and the OSCE Minsk Group has chided the leaders of Armenia and Azerbaijan for not preparing their people for peace, for not doing enough. I think now it's very clear that the leaders of Armenia and Azerbaijan really do not have an independent decision on this issue. And in fact, 3 times they have come to initial very, very serious peace agreements between Armenia and Azerbaijan, and each time this agreement was derailed by its northern neighbor. Azerbaijan is also very important to Washington in terms of Washington's Iran policy, but for the same reason, Iran works very hard to destabilize Azerbaijan. Iran, we call it Persia, Persian music, Persian people, is a multi-ethnic country where a half of the population is ethnic minorities, and all in all, a third of the population of Iran is ethnic Azerbaijanis. So with Iran keeping this in mind, does everything possible to keep Azerbaijan away from prosperity, involved in wars, involved in conflicts, because it fears if Azerbaijan is a fully stable, open society, it could be a source of emulation for its own Azerbaijani minority. Even, by the way, Khamenei, the spiritual leader of Iran, or the leader of Iran, is native Azerbaijani, and Mousawi, head of the Green Movement, native Azerbaijani. It's a very serious question for Iran's stability as well. European energy security, Azerbaijan is the only country that is bringing additional supplies of gas, not rerouting existing supplies of gas into Eastern Europe. The southern corridor, while volumes are small at the beginning, they target specifically vulnerable countries which have almost 100% dependence on Russia. And this is basically a superhighway that once it's built, other regions such as the Balkans can easily link into it. Other supply sources such as from Iraqi Kurdistan or from Israel could eventually use this infrastructure. So it's very important for European energy security. Again, quite noted by Russia, and we will probably generally, as we see attempts to undermine this project. I think that the people in Azerbaijan take very serious your commission, your work, the U.S. government statements on the state of regime, on the state of human rights, on the state of democracy. The only thing where I think where it's very problematic, some of the statements that have come are related to religious freedom. And this is where sometimes I think people in the government feel no matter what we do, we really can do no right with the United States. Of all places, the field where you look at the reports from the National Commission on Religious Freedom, I think this is where the place where the United States government has not done the best, most professional work. There is a place, for instance, some of the criticism is related to Azerbaijan has blocked anti-Semitic literature from Iran to enter into Azerbaijan. I applaud that they blocked that. I think this is an independent decision. Germany has a law against anti-Semitic literature. We don't go into Germany and say, why do you block anti-Semitic literature? On the question of terror financing, the United States, if you had Hamas sending money into religious organizations in the United States, you would find those violations and you would find people put on trial. I don't think that the United States has to intervene when funds or literature are coming, that their whole attempt is to destabilize a country and to destabilize the very positive ethnic and religious makeup of the country. And the last, even on the issue of religious coercion, if a country decides that it wants to give children, young girls, the choice to not be veiled and be coerced by their parents to be veiled, this balance between right of the parents to religious freedom and right of the child to choice is really a place where I think the U.S. government shouldn't intervene and to allow states to make their independent decisions. Just a last point that as the U.S. improves relationship with Iran, it disengages from a number of arenas, such as Iraq and Afghanistan. We're going to need our allies on the ground more than ever. If we're physically not in these places, we're going to need our allies. And I think it's very important in your mission, did you go there as a friend? Things that have to be improved, we improve as allies and we improve as friends. And I thank you for your work in this direction.
Well, thank you both for your testimony. Ms. Schaefer, thank you for taking on the responsibility of more people knowing about the Helsinki Commission. I can't imagine what you woke up to every morning looking at your wall. But we appreciate that. I think that prior to Russia's incursion in Ukraine, most Americans had never heard of OSCE or the Helsinki Commission. And it clearly is an extremely important organization for U.S. interests. So we thank you for your passion on the work of our commission. Let me assure both of you that Azerbaijan has made commitments for access for NGOs at our annual meetings, so that we will have opportunities to meet with NGOs. We will have there will be free access for all points of view, so that we can have an open discussion at our parliamentary assembly. I want to ask both of you basically what you think the opportunities are now for strengthening not just the U.S. ties with Azerbaijan, but also adherence to the OSCE principles within Azerbaijan. As has been pointed out, what's happened with Russia and the incursion in Ukraine and previous to that in Georgia is certainly on the minds of the Azerbaijanis. There's no question about that. And with Armenia developing closer ties with Russia, as they have with the economic partnership and their vote in the United Nations on Ukraine, it seems to me that the Azerbaijanis recognize that there could be serious issues in Russia's taking sides on territorial issues in that region. I'm sure there are other reasons why there is a desire to strengthen their ties with the United States. We have strong strategic partnerships. And yet it's important to us that Azerbaijan adhere to all the principles of Helsinki, not just the security basket and the economic basket, but also the human rights basket. So where do you believe that the most progress can be made in strengthening the relationship between the United States and Azerbaijan, as particularly it relates to the Helsinki commitments?
Who do you want first?
Whoever wants to go first.
Okay. Okay. Yes, I agree with you, Senator Cardin, that Ukraine, Crimea, this is an earthquake for the region. I think not only because of the violation of territorial integrity, because if you're Georgia, Moldova, Azerbaijan, you've already had a chunk of your territory pulled out with Russian support. I mean, the Soviet Union, there were hundreds of disjunctures between the ethnic and national borders. The only places, with the exception of Chechnya, where violent conflict broke out were places where there was Russian support. Meaning these wars are not about ethnic conflict, but they're about one power using different groups in order to leverage over other groups. But what I think particularly why there's the interlap between the domestic and the foreign policy here, and where your work is important, is that think about, for countries in the region, Crimea happens, it's not just a military invasion, everything was in place. There were people there to run the government, there were parliamentarians ready to make the vote. It was very smooth, and I think this is why it's really been a very scary incidents for the people in the region. Again, they know about taking territory, but to see how porous many of their countries are, finding the proper balance between protecting yourself from that infiltration and proper maintenance of human rights and OSCE principles. I don't know what the magic formula it is, and hopefully you have some answers for that. I think that when there is a strong and engaged U.S., it's better for prosperity and human rights than when a U.S. that just sits on the sidelines and complains and says this isn't good. I don't want to live in a world where the strongest power isn't the United States and it's any of the alternative powers. And so we need to keep our allies. In terms of specific issues where I think you could find a lot of cooperation with the government and can be improved on the human rights and rule of law issues, one is property rights. In Azerbaijan, strengthening the process of property rights when people have control of their property. It's an important part of the citizenship. And continuing development of the democratic culture in universities, which I think has been a very positive development in Azerbaijan.
Thank you. Ms. Lansky?
Thank you. I'm going to start with the geopolitics and come back to the OSCE principles. Azerbaijan has a very skillful foreign policy. It's true that they're in a tough neighborhood, but they've become very good at creating different types of relationships with their neighbors. President Aliyev recently visited Tehran. He's also visited Baghdad. He has good relations. There are new border crossings being opened with Iran. There's robust trade with Iran. The Azeri defense minister was recently in Moscow meeting with Russian and Iranian counterparts, and he came out of those meetings saying that he was very satisfied with defense cooperation in many spheres with both Russia and Iran. President Putin visited Baku last summer and endorsed President Aliyev during a critical moment in the presidential elections. Russia's Rosneft and SOCAR have just signed a joint venture. Azerbaijan is able to have a very, actually, I would say, independent foreign policy, does not have Russian military bases. It does not have a Russian ethnic minority. It is economically independent of Russia. Russia is not its biggest trading partner. So Azerbaijan is able to use these situations to its advantage. And it is using the current crisis and the attention paid to Ukraine and to energy issues to carry out a domestic crackdown. There is no reason to suppose that the crackdown is somehow inspired by either Russia or Iran. Azerbaijan changes the subject. And what it can do, and what it has seen it can do over the last 10 years of participating in Council of Europe, and more than 10 years, 20 years of participating in the OSCE, is that it can change the subject away from its human rights and domestic, the democracy obligations to subjects of energy and security, and never have to address the human dimension. They have seen that indeed they can go from just joining the Council of Europe to taking up important positions within it, that they can go from just being a participant in OSCE to actually hosting the Parliamentary Assembly and not improve. ODIHR has monitored 8 elections, national elections in Azerbaijan since 1995. Their recommendations have never been, each time they issue recommendations, there's no follow-through on that from Azerbaijan. In my view, you raised in the last panel coming up with some specific benchmarks. You could take recommendations from ODIHR. You could take political prisoners, release of political prisoners, treatment of NGOs. You could also draw their attention to some strong anti-American statements that come from high levels of Azeri government. like the head of the presidential administration, who blames American NGOs for the revolution in Ukraine, for instance. You could note the treatment of Senate staff when they met with Azerbaijan's opposition journalists. They were denounced in the press. They were denounced by parliamentary members of Azerbaijan. And that's treatment of Corker's staff. That Azerbaijan wants to have part of a relationship but not others, and they simply can't happen.
Give me your top 3 in priority order that you would like to see progress made, that you believe, knowing the politics of the region, could be achieved.
They could easily repeal the new NGO legislation. That would just return it, in terms of a benchmark, return it to a few years back, say. And you could come up with specifics. We could work with ICNL to come up with some, very technical specifics. They could release political prisoners. They could start with the 19 identified by Amnesty International as prisoners of conscience. And they could undertake working seriously with ODIHR to follow up on specific ODIHR recommendations.
That's very helpful. Thank you. Mr. Smith.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. And just let me ask a couple of questions. On Monday, I returned from 4 days on the ground in Abuja, in Nigeria. Second trip in about 10 months. I was in Jos last September, where a number of Christian churches have been firebombed by Boko Haram. This time I met with a number of survivors, again, including one of the Chibok girls and a father whose 2 daughters were among the Chibok abductees, and he's Muslim, a moderate Muslim, but Muslim nevertheless, although Christians are targeted. We know just from reading yesterday's newspapers that a major gain has been made by the radical Islamists in Iraq. Afghanistan is a cauldron and bad and getting worse. Syria remains a place where both sides are slaughtering people, especially Christians. I've held several hearings on the fact that the rebels, particularly the disparate elements who are radical Islamists, have been slaughtering Christians by design, not as collateral, they're in the way, but simply targeting Christians. And then 2 weeks ago, I chaired a hearing with Robbie George of the Commission on International Religious Freedom. He was very concerned, and I know it was just mentioned in testimony that there is a concern that on religious freedom we have not stood up as robustly as we could. There have been no CPC designations since 2011. Those that are in force have lapsed. Another list of countries that ought to be CPC have not been put on the list. There's been no ambassador at large for half of the president's tenure. We hope someone like, with the credentials of Rabbi Saperstein, may soon emerge as the person to be ambassador at large for international religious freedom, but delay is denial. And Robbie George, again, the chairman of the Religious Freedoms Commission, said that Azerbaijan is a Tier 2 country, right on the bubble, if you will, in terms of religious persecution. So there is this surge going on everywhere. I see it all over Africa. My committee is Africa, Global Health, Global Human Rights. And so I'm frequently there, and the chairman knows because he follows Africa like the back of his hand as well. These organizations in the Middle East and everywhere else this is not ebb tide, this is surge. And I'm wondering if you could speak to how this is impacting Azerbaijan. Where are they in terms of the intolerance? Are they bad and getting worse? You mentioned 19 political prisoners, and I think your recommendation to visit or try to is an excellent one. Last year when we were in Baku, led so ably our delegation by Senator Wicker, we had a very, very frank discussion with the president, with Aliyev, and we raised human rights issues point by point by point. I think he was a bit miffed that it was such a blunt conversation, but all members joined in. It was a very good discussion. Of course, we'll do that again, and I know Senator Cardin never holds back, nor do I, especially when it comes to human rights. So this religious freedom issue, which seems to be festering as never before, and your thoughts with regards to Azerbaijan. Secondly, one of the issues I raised with the president last year, since 1982, I have been raising the issue. I've been in Congress 34 years now, particularly as it relates to the People's Republic of China, with the aggressively anti-female policy of sex selection abortion. China is now missing 100 million girls. Worldwide, especially in India and in China, the three most dangerous words are "it's a girl," and after 5 months, when an ultrasound is done, very often, if discovered that it's a girl, she is killed. She's decimated, exterminated. Now, we raised that in Baku because in Azerbaijan, there is a serious problem of sex ratios of more boys than girls. And I'm wondering if you've seen those reports, your thoughts on that, because the girl child is being targeted. And of course, this then becomes a magnet for human trafficking. The reason why China is on Tier 3 list, and I wrote the Trafficking Victims Protection Act of 2000. Last year, Senator Curry wisely put China on Tier 3, liable to sanctions, simply because of the magnet that the missing girls has created when systematically they've been exterminated since 1979 through sex selection abortion. Maybe as many as 100 million missing daughters. Azerbaijan, nowhere near the same aggregate numbers, but they have a serious problem, and I'm very worried that there will be a nexus with trafficking into Azerbaijan because of the missing girls. Do you see any of that, and your thoughts on that as well? And finally, the political prisoners that you would recommend that we meet with, perhaps privately or now, if you had an order of who it is that you think we should go all out as a commission to meet with, please tender that list.
So thank you. It was very comprehensive. In terms of who to meet with, I realized just now that neither me nor the previous speakers mentioned NIDA Youth Group, who also, there are 8 youth activists who just received long prison terms as well. We could come up with a list. I think taking Amnesty's 19 and maybe choosing some from different categories. There are some journalists that are in prison, maybe also looking at people who have been in jail longer. The list that Leila Yunus put together has 130 people. That's a Azeri NGO, and they've been tracking it since the 90s. Some of the political prisoners they identify have been there much longer, since the 90s, for instance. So we can come up with different types of activists. If you're interested in meeting religious activists, that's also, there's some that are imams that had drugs planted on them, for instance, that you may choose to try to see. In terms of freedom of religion, in Azerbaijan, the main issue is not, Dr. Schaefer has pointed out that Jews have always been welcomed and are seen as, and generally in the Caucasus that's the case, Jews are seen as a native, have been there for 2,000 years, are seen as a native. So it's not so much Jews or even Christians, I think it's a much smaller Christian community, but different strands within Islam. And whether mosques are registered or unregistered, and whether they belong to a spiritual board. There's a licensed board that has a near monopoly on religious observance. And those laws have also been tightened in 2000. There was amendments to the law, or a new law in 2009, and those have been used to make illegal any Muslim practice outside of a very narrow range. That, I believe, is the main issue that has led to more and more prisoners. That and also that the religious can be government critics. It is not necessarily about maintaining a kind of monopoly on religious practice, but it's also that certain imams emerge as critics of the government, and they are the ones who are being put in jail. So I think that's definitely an important issue in Azerbaijan as well. And I should probably mention also there are different, among Christian groups, Baptists, Jehovah's Witnesses, so forth, groups that are newer to Azerbaijan that also can be subjects of harassment.
Azerbaijan is far from perfect on the human rights and democracy, and it's good that there is the dialogue with the U.S. government, with the U.S. Congress on these issues. Religious freedom is not the issue. All the important examples you gave of extremism, of discrimination against women, again, the country is imperfect, but this is the one area where they should be getting the star on their report card and not the criticism. There's fine lines when you look at, for instance, the idea of freedom for NGO financing and prevention of terror financing. Even in U.S. legislation, finding that proper balance where you allow an organization to be free and to associate with who it wants and to promote what it wants. On the other hand, to prevent moving of funds. I mean, the U.S. government is the leader around the world of preventing of terror financing. Then when one of its allies implements this legislation and prevents money transfers from Iran, from extreme religious organizations, it's criticized by the U.S. government. The idea of proselytization that have been related to, in U.S. reports, this comes out as prosecution against Christian minorities. These are not native minorities. These are not people that were born in Azerbaijan. These are people that come to proselytize in Azerbaijan. I know I've spent a big chunk of my life in Israel. It also has a law against proselytization. I'm very happy it does, so that people can actually be free from coercion and be free from constant inundation of religious propaganda.
You're not suggesting that when somebody proselytizes, there's an element of coercion in it, are you?
It depends. If you're
in Israel?
In Israel, there's a law that prevents it, actually. So there isn't, and again, there's been questions in the U.S. National Commission
free
on Religious
speech is
Freedom.
involved here as well.
Sorry?
Free speech is involved here as well.
I think, you know, from research even that I've read of the Commission on Religious Freedom, that the issue of proselytization, right to proselytization and freedom from harassment is a very fine line where the Commission, again, maybe in the next hearing a Commission member can speak on this, but it's a fine line where I don't think there's any consensus where freedom of religion starts and where freedom from harassment starts. So it's very. I don't think that's the right to proselytize. Is that something that the U.S. wants to promote around the world? Even an independent government wants to see it in a different way. Even the question of who's a political prisoner. A number of the defined political prisoners by the EU in Europe, in Azerbaijan, excuse me, are actually people that were tried for receiving funds from Iran and being members of terrorist organizations that worked had plots to blow up the U.S. embassy, kill the U.S. ambassador, blow up the Israeli embassy, kill leaders of the Jewish community in Azerbaijan. So again, member in a terrorist organization or political prisoner. It's a very defined quite differently by different organizations. The question of human trafficking, I don't think there's any prominent citizen of Azerbaijan, researcher would not say their government has worked strongly to prevent trafficking, that this is something that's very part of the government policy. It's not just part of the non-government policy. And the government has also worked against early marriage, coerced marriage of young girls in Azerbaijan. Again, at times criticized by human rights organizations. Why are there laws, preventing the child to do what the parent wants when their goal is to preserve the freedom of the child?
And the missing girls?
I'm not aware of this issue of the.
Just with all the respect on the proselytization issue, if there is coercion involved, where people are being told they must, that's one thing, and it's a difficult line of demarcation between harassment. The free speech ought to be as unfettered as possible, and that goes for religious freedom as well. So I would hope that, if somebody wants to take either the gospel or any other faith-based creed and bring that to a country, of course, we hope they would do it with sensitivity to the local culture. But I think we have to be very careful to ever construe that to be coercion. Coercion is physical or some other kind of compulsion with real consequences, often beatings or economic penalties. I don't see preachers doing any of that. So I would hope that, we would be very careful about how we define coercion. Thank you. Thanks, Ben.
Well, let me thank both of you for your testimony. It's been extremely helpful to us, and particularly in trying to set up priorities for our visit as to where we can make the most impact, and we will certainly take that information into consideration. We work very closely with our State Department, who also will supply us with comparable information of where we think it's important to try to strengthen the ties between our two countries and to see the type of progress made that helps promote that type of improvement of our bilateral relation. With that, the hearing will stand adjourned. Thank you all very much.